In late 2024, the Vintage Gatherers, a group of talented ladies here in the area, approached the Muncy Historical Society to support their membership in the Quilts of Valor Foundation. The Quilts of Valor Foundation began in 2003 and has evolved. Today, with quilts being given to active service members, veterans who have served in different times, in different conflicts, in different wars. My wife Linda, who serves as a group leader, a member of the Vintage Gatherers, is going to introduce today's veterans. Linda?
The Vintage Gatherer quilters in our local community, in partnership with the Muncy Historical Society, are making these quilts to honor and gift to veterans and service members. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Who are our willing veterans and active service military personnel? They represent all branches of the United States military, those who served stateside and those who served abroad. Century technology.
Made by humans. Humans are not infallible.
Veterans of the United States Armed Forces during declared war, conflicts, police actions, peacekeeping missions, and counterterrorism operations. Veterans who have cared for casualties, injured and ill in the front lines, in theater, deployed or in hospitals, and medical centers overseas and stateside. Veterans who have provided support and supplies to those engaged in battle or combat. Veterans who have provided casualty assistance to families of the fallen, escorting the fallen remains and or participating in honor guards. Veterans who have been wounded or injured in training for combat or in direct support of combat. And if a veteran with an honorable medical or general discharge. Each service is registered with the Quilts of Valor Foundation, and each presentation quilt has a special label designating it as an official Quilt of Valor. The label confirms who received the quilt, who pieced it, who quilted it, and who bound the layers together. Entry into military service is a life-changing event. The personal commitment of taking an oath to protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, is a powerful commitment made by our young men and women. All veterans share the common military experience of enlistment, initial or specialized training, and assignment to a unit with a specific military mission. The induction and ceremonies, as well as the subsequent military training, form a specialized learning experience that leaves a lasting imprint, often becoming central to the identity of the people who experience them. Upon completion of training, service members are then assigned to a specific unit, force, or shipped for a period of years with an assigned military mission. These units may be stationed stateside, overseas, or deployed to a combat theater of operations. For many veterans, the imprint of war is felt beyond their tour of duty and carries over into the transition from military to civilian life. This is true regardless of the era of service. When asked about their experiences in the first few years after leaving the military, combat veterans are less likely to say they are frequently felt optimistic about their future than those who didn't serve in combat. And they are more likely to say they didn't get the respect that they deserved, struggled with a lack of structure in civilian life, and felt disconnected from their family and friends. What I like to do is I like to take us back to the period of time when our veterans were serving with the United States branches, and so I'm going to start with that now. U.S. Air Force support services between 1967 and 1972 were heavily defined by a massive logistical, maintenance, and security requirements of the Vietnamese War, with U.S. troop levels in Vietnam peaking at over 536,000 in 1968. During this period, support services transitioned from established European bases, such as the closure of operations in France. In 1966, President de Gaulle announced that France would loosen its ties to NATO. He announced that French forces were no longer available to the Allies, and all foreign Army and Air Force units, as well as NATO headquarters, had to be removed out of France by April of 1967. Losing the French bases was a blow to the U.S. Air Force Europe. A large-scale relocation plan, called Operation Freelock, was developed to remove all U.S. aircraft, equipment, and 33,000 United States Air Force personnel from France to other parts of Europe. As a result, U.S. Air Force presence in England grew considerably. The U.S. Air Force in England included a tactical reconnaissance wing at the Upper Hefford Air Force Base. Most of the aircraft at Upper Hefford came from a major U.S. Air Force base in Nebraska, serving as headquarters for the U.S. Strategic Command. Known for its role in nuclear command, control, communications, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, Upper Hefford was to serve as the new and urgently needed base for the McDonnell RF-101 Voodoos at the 66th Tactical Reconnaissance Wing, which had been stationed in France. The aircraft were used to fly missions along the borders of Poland, the Soviet Union, and Czechoslovakia, monitoring and recording military communications. The base played a critical role in NATO deterrence, with heightened aircraft shelters designed to withstand Soviet strikes. In the 1970s, the General Dynamics F-111 arrived. The Aardvark was a supersonic medium-range fighter bomber. This Aardvark was a complicated beast. They were equipped with terrain tracking, radar, and electronic surveillance systems, allowing them to fly at full capacity around the clock and in any weather conditions. Typically, they were equipped with immediate range nuclear weapons, which made navigation, control, and security of the craft a matter of crucial importance. The Aardvarks had roles that included attack, strategic bombing, and electronic warfare. Ward described their flying in Vietnam as the speed is light. If you do more than one pass in the target area, you will die. The Aardvark's ability with terrain following radar to fly as low as 200 feet above ground level was the fastest in most weather conditions, and it made it very effective. They could operate in weather that grounded most other aircrafts. The avionics systems included communications, navigation, terrain following, target acquisition and attack, and suppression of enemy air defense systems. A radar bombing system was used for defense and precise delivery of weapons on targets during the night and also in bad weather. Mr. Benner served at both Upper Hefford and the Nebraska Air Force bases, both bases with missions focusing on nuclear deterrence, intelligence, surveillance, and worldwide command and control. In his role as a U.S. Air Force electronic warfare technician, his duties included maintenance of critical specialized systems, such as those radar warning receivers and countermeasures equipment on combat aircraft, troubleshooting and repairing electronic jamming, radar honing, and warning systems. As a technician, he was essential for ensuring aircraft survival against sophisticated Soviet-supplied radar-guided defenses in Southeast Asia. Serving in the United States Air Force from 1967 to 1972, Mr. Bender, it is our pleasure to honor your service this afternoon. If you would come forward, and Becky Rishel.
We'd like to show the recipient the quilt first, and then we'll show it to you all.
Take it at an arm and smile for the camera. So they can get it without the, you can put it right up there, that'd be great. Is that good? Thank you so much. Thank you. Yep. You're gonna get a Pennsylvania National Guard has a dual mission to protect life, property, and maintain peace within the Commonwealth. I want to make sure you can all hear me. And maintain peace within the Commonwealth, disaster relief, security, and humanitarian aid, while training to support U.S. national security in combat and supporting overseas missions. The 28th Infantry Division is a unit of the United States Army National Guard, and it's the oldest division size unit in the Army. The division was officially established in 1879 and was later redesignated as the 28th Infantry in 1917, after the entry of America into the First World War. The 28th Infantry goes by the name of Iron Division, and it's one of the most decorated infantry divisions in the United States Army. Although the division was not mobilized during the Vietnam War, it was selected as one of the 3 divisions in the Army Selective Reserve Force. As the tempo of the Vietnam War increased during 1965, and the Johnson administration put the process of escalation into motion, it was necessary to increase the size of the active Army. Additional units and personnel were required without delay by the active Army to support the strategy of escalation. Before new active Army units could be organized, equipped, and trained, additional units were urgently needed in South Vietnam. To meet this requirement, substantial strategic Army force units were deployed, and this resulted in a serious gap in the defense readiness of the United States, which was expected to continue to exist until these new units could be formed. In view of these circumstances, the decision was made to place heavy reliance on the reserve components of the Army. This was a new concept and served as the basis for forming the Selective Reserve Force. The combat units were furnished by the Army National Guard, with Mr. Reeser serving the 2nd Battalion of the 28th, placed in an accelerated training program to prepare to be mobilized within 11 weeks or less. The training objective of the Selective Reserve Force units was to achieve and maintain the highest possible level of training, which could be accomplished at home station without mobilization. The requirement for increased readiness was not a prelude to mobilization, but a precautionary measure in light of the existing world conditions. It appeared doubtful that mobilization would be required, and it was recognized that the units which had already achieved such a high state of readiness should not be required to bear the intensive training burden. The decision was made to designate existing force as SRF-1 and to create a scaled-down SRF-2. During 1968, the long-expected mobilization did come for a limited number of the SRF-1s and the SRF-2 units. Beginning in 1964, national civil disturbances in the form of protests, activists, intellectuals, students, civil rights leaders, among others, against U.S. involvement in Vietnam. And while Mr. Reeser and his SRF-2 unit was not deployed, he did receive additional training, this time in riot control after the Kent State University tragic incident. During Mr. Reeser's U.S. Army Reserve service from 1964 to 1970, he served as staff sergeant and squad leader, whose responsibilities included training, discipline, and logistical readiness, along with tactical operations, supervising maintenance and supply, and enforcing U.S. military standards. The military transforms our young men and women from the civilian lives they live into a military culture that demands compliance, respect for authority, responsiveness, and teamwork. These are traits that often remain with the individuals long after they leave military service, and in many cases become outward manifestations of who they are and how they act as veterans. Mr. Reeser's experience as a supply specialist complemented his lifelong career as a heating and plumbing supply sales specialist. He served as Boy Scout Troop 38 leader, and he's an active member of his church and with the Lions Club. Mr. Reeser, it is our pleasure to honor your service this afternoon. I need you to go do something else. I need to
you, sir. Thank you.
Members of the U.S. military have been called into action many times during the 1985 to 2002 period. In 1985, U.S. Navy pilots intercepted an Egyptian airliner and forced it to land in Sicily. The airliner was carrying the hijackers of the Italian cruise ship, during which an American citizen had been killed. In March of 1986, U.S. forces, while engaged in freedom of navigation exercises around the Gulf of Sidra, were attacked by Libyan missiles, and the United States responded with its own. In April of 1986, President Reagan reported the air and naval forces had conducted bombing strikes in terrorist facilities and military installations in the Libyan capital, claiming that Libyan leader Gaddafi had been responsible for the bomb attack at the German disco that killed 2 U.S. soldiers. The U.S. Stark was struck in 1987 by 2 anti-ship missiles fired by the Iraqi Air Force, killing 37 U.S. Navy sailors. In October of 1987, Operation Nimble Archer commenced with U.S. naval forces attacking 2 Iranian oil platforms in the Persian Gulf. How times have changed. After the Iraq-Iranian War, the United States increased U.S. joint military forces operations in the Persian Gulf and adopted a policy of reflagging and escorting Kuwait oil tankers through the Persian Gulf to protect them from Iraqi and Iranian attacks. President Reagan reported that U.S. ships had been fired upon or struck mines or taken other military action. The United States gradually reduced its forces after a ceasefire between Iran and Iraq in 1988. In addition to the Near East, other troubles were brewing. Operation Golden Pheasant was an emergency deployment of U.S. troops to Honduras in 1988, and as a result of threatening actions by the forces of the then socialist Nicaraguans. In September of 1989, President Bush announced that military and law enforcement assistance would be sent to help the Andean nation of Colombia, Bolivia, and Peru and also to combat illicit drug producers and traffickers. By mid-September, there were 50 to 100 U.S. military advisors in Colombia in connection with transport and training in the use of military equipment, plus special services teams of 2 to 12 persons to train troops in these 3 countries. On December 21st, 1989, President Bush ordered U.S. military forces to Panama, Operation Just Cause, to protect the lives of American citizens and to bring General Noriega to justice. Bush had become opposed to Noriega's continued leadership of Panama due to his connections with drug smuggling and money laundering, as well as the security situation around Panama Canal. In the months leading up to the invasion, the Bush administration implemented economic sanctions and increased local troop levels. The Panamanian legislature declared that a state of war existed with the United States due to the escalating tension between the 2 countries. A U.S. serviceman was killed in Panama the following day. This and other events, including the harassment of a U.S. officer and his wife, precipitated the United States action, codenamed Operation Just Cause. On August of 1990, President Bush reported the launch of Operation Desert Shield by ordering the forward deployment of substantial elements of the United States Air Forces into the Persian Gulf region to help defend Saudi Arabia from Iraq. Desert Storm was followed by Operation Desert Storm and Operation Desert Saber and Operation Provide Comfort, the delivery of humanitarian relief and military protection for Kurds fleeing their homes to northern Iraq. 6 days after Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, it was August of 1990, a task force was deployed to Saudi Arabia. Their intense training began in anticipation of paratroopers fighting it out in the desert with the heavily armed Iraqi army. Their training concentrated on chemical defense, anti-armor tactics, and live fire maneuver exercises. The battle cry picked up by the paratroopers was, the road home is through Baghdad. During 1991 to 1996, U.S. troops were in Zaire, Sierra Leone, Bosnia, Operation Denied Flight back in Kuwait, The United States, United Kingdom, and our Gulf allies declared and enforced no-fly zones in the majority of southern Iraqi airspace, prohibiting Iraqi flights in zones in southern Iraq and northern Iraq, conducting area reconnaissance and several specific attacks on Iraqi Air Force air defense systems. In Somalia, 2 American US-60 Black Hawks were shot down, 18 Americans were killed in action, another 73 wounded and 1 captured. In 1993, President Lincoln sent 350 soldiers to the Republic of Macedonia to participate in the UN Protection Force to help maintain stability in the area of the former Yugoslavia. In 1996, Operation Quick Response was the deployment of U.S. military personnel to Central Africa to conduct the evacuation of private U.S. citizens and certain U.S. government employees and to provide enhanced security for the embassy. There was Operation Desert Strike in Iraq, Operation Joint Guard in Bosnia, Operation Silver Lake, all evacuating certain U.S. government employees and private citizens. In 1998, President Clinton ordered a cruise missile attack against 2 suspected terrorist training camps in Afghanistan and a suspected chemical factory in Sudan. America also deployed a standby response and evacuation force of 30 military personnel to increase the security force at the U.S. Embassy in Liberia. The war on terror began with Operation Enduring Freedom. In October 2001, armed forces invaded Afghanistan in response to the 9/11 attacks and began combat action in Afghanistan against Al-Qaeda and their Taliban supporters. Mr. Crossan's service covered all the above-mentioned military engagements. He served with the 325th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 83rd Airborne Division. His deployments took him to Central America, Honduras, Panama, the Persian Gulf, Kuwait, Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Egypt, and other places around the world. His position, Staff Sergeant from 1985 to 1994, was a combat leadership position responsible for leading paratroopers in this rapid deployment elite infantry unit. He has recorded 165 jumps, with the majority of those as part of his 11-year career with the U.S. Army. During the period 1996 to 2002, he served as captain of the U.S. Army Reservist Unit. The 82nd Airborne Division, of which the 325th Air Force or Parachute Infantry Regiment is attached, is widely considered an elite U.S. Army unit, recognized for its rigorous training, rapid deployment capabilities, and history of success in high-stake missions. Functioning as a strategic reserve force, they are among the most elite conventional forces, specializing in forcible entry and airborne operations. It is maintained as a culture of readiness, capable of wheels up and deploying worldwide within 18 hours of notification. They are trained to conduct large-scale parachute drops. This involves thousands of paratroopers jumping simultaneously from aircraft to overwhelm their objective quickly. The use of parachutes allows them to leapfrog enemy front lines to strike key infrastructure, disrupt defenses, and secure terrain that traditional ground troops could not reach quickly. They are trained to operate under commander's intent. Because jumps often result in units being scattered, individual soldiers in small units are empowered to integrate and fight effectively without explicit orders. The 2nd Battalion, 325th Airborne Infantry can deploy worldwide within 18 hours, execute a parachute assault, conduct combat operations, and win. The battalion conducts forcible entry to seize a defended airfield, build up combat power as quickly as possible, and conduct follow-up military operations. Again, the military transforms our young men and women. These are traits that often remain with the individuals long after they leave military service, and in many cases become outward manifestations of who they are. During his reservist years, Mr. Crossan worked as a case manager for an agency that helped adults with mental disabilities learn life skills and to find work and housing. He then worked for the Bureau of Federal Prisons, where he saved a chaplain's life who had suffered an aortic aneurysm. Mr. Crossan received his medical discharge for life-altering injuries that he sustained during the Panama engagement. stepping on an incendiary device that caused serious shrapnel wounds. A Purple Heart recipient, Mr. Crossan, it is our pleasure to honor your service this afternoon.
He said he just said.
Can we at least take over your time? I want to show you first. On one side, we'll just bring it down. Somebody probably missed. And Priscilla Glass is the program. He said I gave him too much credit. On October 1st, 1985, the 7th Infantry Division of the U.S. Army was classified as light infantry, a division that has evolved to include rapid deployment units that emphasize speed and mobility over armor and firepower. The term light denotes units lacking heavy weapons and armor, or with a reduced vehicle footprint as an opposition to the motorized infantry, both of which rely heavily on vehicles for both transport and for combat. Light infantry units lack the greater firepower, operational mobility, and protection, but possess correspondingly greater tactical mobility and can execute missions in severely restricted terrains in areas where weather makes vehicular mobility difficult. Light infantry soldiers had to be mentally tough and more physically fit than other soldiers. They also had to operate independently, each a well-led and highly cohesive formation of disciplined soldiers. Using initiative and audacity, these units would take advantage of every opportunity to attack the enemy. They would train to fight at night and in the most adverse weather conditions. In their operations, shock rather than firepower would be decisive. The force designers adopted the term elite to describe light infantry units, that the training regimen had to be tough, physical, realistic, and mentally demanding. Despite the usage of the term light, forces in a light unit normally carry heavier individual loads, carrying everything they require to fight, survive, and to win. Although they often train to conduct air assaults or move by a truck, the division's light infantry battalions are expected to maneuver primarily on foot. Trained for basic offensive and defensive missions, light units were also trained to prepare for specific operations that took advantage of their unique skills and attributes. To leverage their stealth and mitigate their vulnerability to heavy artillery and air attacks, light infantry units at all echelons would train to conduct all operations at night. This capability was considered a key characteristic, and the Army's light infantry document stated that night operations were the forte of these new divisions. The 7th Infantry Division would be optimized for defeating lightly armed enemy forces such as insurgents or other light infantry units with a focus on Central and Latin America and the Caribbean. The doctrine for light infantry battalions used new technology to identify special tactics such as search and attack, urban storm, urban web, and expanding terrain. The last of these was a version of an infiltration operation that featured small groups of light fighters slipping through enemy lines undetected to attack critical sites deep in a rear area. Serving in the military from 1985 to 1989, Mr. Rischel was a light infantry soldier who relied on his own abilities to carry out missions under restrictive conditions. This training, stealth, field craft, and fitness is a member of a Rapid Deployment Division unit. They typically rely on their ability to operate under restrictive conditions, surprise, violence of attack, training, field craft, and fitness, and operating in many areas that remain classified to us today. In March of 1988, President Reagan dispatched elements of the 7th Infantry Quick Reaction Force on a known notice of deployment. This small force quickly landed at an Air Force base and moved quickly into position at a Honduran military base. An International Special Operations Unit and the aviation assets of Joint Task Force Bravo worked along with the 7th Infantry Division, who were already on the ground several days before the 82nd Airborne elements arrived. That deployment evolved into a live fire exercise. The light infantry soldiers, paratroopers, and special ops units deployed ready to fight. The units began rigorous training exercises with orders to avoid the fighting on the border. Had those orders changed, the paratroopers and light infantrymen were prepared to fight, causing the Sandinistas to rapidly withdraw back across the border. Within days, the opposing government negotiated a truce with the Contra leaders, and by the end of March, the 7th Infantry had returned to Fort Ord, California. The show of force worked, and the division did not see combat there. The military, as I said earlier, does transform our young men and women from their civilian lives. And the traits, compliance, respect for authority, responsiveness, and teamwork are traits that are often remain with individuals long after they leave military service. After his military discharge, Mr. Rischel joined the Pennsylvania State Police, providing law enforcement and public safety services to our residents and visitors to the Commonwealth, while working alongside our local, state, and federal partners. Mr. Rischel, it is our pleasure to honor your services to country and to the state of Pennsylvania. Well, I'm gonna switch places with you here in a minute. Now, if you just turn it around and do it. The bird needs to fly. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Nancy, do you have your Kleenexes out?
Yeah, they're here
Okay.
somewhere.
The USS Harnett County played a significant role as a mothership and floating base for U.S. Navy River Patrol forces in the Mekong Delta during the Vietnam War, particularly between 1966 and 1970. As part of the Brownwater Navy, she provided logistical support, fuel, ammunition, and medical care to small patrol boats and helicopters operating in the hostile territory. Along with other tank landing ships, the Harnett County was updated to be a floating base in the Mekong Delta as part of the Mobile River Rhine Force. As part of this refit, the ship was equipped with a landing area and maintenance facilities for Seawolf helicopters, patrol boat mooring facilities, and more modern communications equipment. The ship would support 10 patrol boats and 2 gunships, and could provide close fire support with its 40mm guns. Harnett County reported for this role in January 1967 and was redesignated as patrol craft tender for the duration of its service until the late 1969s. The Harnett operated as part of Operation Game Warden, a Brown River Navy effort to keep the rivers free of Viet Cong infiltration. The principal objective of Operation Game Warden was to interrupt Viet Cong infiltration in South Vietnam, and the Navy officially expounded upon this objective: to crack down on the transportation of Viet Cong troops and supplies on the ample inland waterways, eliminate enemy lines of communication, enforce nighttime curfews, and defend the main shipping channels to Saigon with constant patrolling and minesweeping. Patrol boats from the Harnett County checked hundreds of sampans, engaged in firefights, and supported SEAL team insertions. The USS Harnett County was involved in Vietnamese counteroffensives, Phase 2, Phase 3, Phase 4, and Phase 5, along with the Tet counteroffensive. Military phases to regain military momentum, to intensify efforts by U.S. forces to disrupt enemy troop movements and destroy supply lines, focusing on attrition, security, and disrupting the North Vietnamese. Mr. Thorne was an active member of the U.S. Navy from 1966 to 1970, followed by 2 years in the Naval Reserves. As a crew member of the Harnett, he acknowledged that the ship stood ready to defend itself against attack at any time, with watch duties of 24/7. Being in enemy waters, the ship shifted its anchor every week so that the Viet Cong could not get an active position in the vessel. Even with all the precautions taken, one seaman, Michael J. Clifford from Luzerne County, was killed by a rifle grenade during the Operation Game Warden. Mr. Thorne served 19 months in a combat zone, and he is the recipient of the Presidential Unit Citation Ribbon, the highest level unit award in the U.S. military, awarded for extraordinary heroism in action against an armed enemy. And the Navy U.S. Coast Guard Unit Commendation Ribbon, the second highest unit awarded in the Navy, following the Presidential Unit Citation, and others. Unfortunately, during his tour of duty, Mr. Thorne was exposed to Agent Orange, which was sprayed along the riverbanks to remove the jungle vegetation, which had been providing coverage for the Viet Cong. While the herbicide, which contained dioxin, cleared the riverbanks, the toxic contaminant is linked to serious health issues in veterans and Vietnamese civilians, including cancer, diabetes, birth defects, and neurological disorders. Mr. Thorne, it is our pleasure to honor your service this afternoon. The Vietnam War. Between 1966 and 1967, U.S. troops increased from 184,000 to over 385,000 soldiers. focusing on finding and destroying enemy forces in South Vietnam. In 1968, the Tet Offensive occurred, a massive coordinated attack by North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong forces on South Vietnamese cities. While this was a military defeat for the communists, it was a political blow to the United States, demonstrating that the war was not close to ending. Then we had the My Lai massacre, which occurred where U.S. soldiers killed hundreds of Vietnamese civilians, causing a scandal that fueled the anti-war movement. Intense bombing campaigns and continued casualties triggered massive anti-war protests, highlighted by the 1968 Chicago Democratic Convention demonstrations. The Vietnam War had escalated into a major American conflict, with U.S. troop levels peaking at over 536,000 soldiers and military personnel by 1969. President Nixon began withdrawing troops, shifting fighting duties to the South Vietnamese forces. 1969 to 1971, the strategy shifted toward Vietnamization, gradually reducing U.S. combat roles while intensifying air campaigns. But the U.S. widened the war, including the 1970 invasion into Cambodia to destroy communist supply lines, and in 1971, South Vietnamese troops invaded Laos in an attempt to disrupt Ho Chi Minh Trail, supported by U.S. air power, but suffering heavy losses and reinforced to retreat. The conflict was increasingly focused on negotiations and ensuring the survival of the South Vietnamese government. And the Fulbright hearings scrutinized the war's justification and executive branch disclosures, significantly impacting public perception. Nixon's Vietnamization and drawdown strategy shifted our involvement in Vietnam from active combat to training the Army of the Republic of Vietnam to handle security, leading to massive troop reductions. This era, often called the drawdown, was marked with failing morale, reduced offensive operations, high drug use, and racial tensions, as forces focused on training South Vietnamese troops and closing bases. By late 1971, the U.S. force presence dropped to 157,000, with only 12,000 combat infantrymen remaining, shifting the focus to defense, advisory roles, and air support. During the 1966-71 period of the Vietnam War, U.S. Army military advisor training focused on preparing personnel to mentor South Vietnamese forces amidst a rapid escalation of the conflict. Key elements included specialized courses in language, culture, and counterinsurgency, particularly as the policy shifted the focus of developing the Republic of Vietnam Armed Forces to take over combat operations. Starting in 1966, Mr. McMahon began his basic training at Fort Ord, California, followed by advanced individual training at the Aberdeen Training Ground in Maryland, then Officer Training School at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where he graduated as a distinguished military graduate in 1969. He attended Defense Languages Institute Support Command at Fort Bliss. His next deployment stationed him in West Germany, and then he was on to Vietnam, 1967 to 1969. In 1970, Mr. McMahon began his assignments as a military assistance training advisor, trained in counterinsurgency theory, tactics, techniques, and procedures, Vietnamese language familiarization, local customs and cultural awareness to help him operate in rural areas. Training also prepared him to advise the Republic of Vietnam Armed Forces in combat planning, intelligence, psychological warfare, communications, logistics, and medical areas. Mr. McMahon, who was on the advisory team to the 5th Army of the Republic of North Vietnam Infantry Division, part of Advisory Team 70, was responsible for training counterparts in logistics, supply management, and maintenance of U.S.-provided equipment. These advisors helped create sustainable logistics systems despite heavy reliance on U.S. support. As Assistant G3 Plans and Training Advisor and Assistant G4 Advisor, he was responsible for advising his South Vietnamese counterparts on tactical planning, operational training, and the integration of combat operations. This role was critical in implementing the Progress Together program and overseeing the division's transition to offensive operations under the Vietnamese re-victimization program, assisting in the development at the division level. Like other veterans here today, the military transforms our veterans, and Mr. McMahon is no exception. For 6 years, he served as Director of Lycoming County Veterans Affairs. While serving veterans in the county, he also helped to secure Lycoming County as a designated Purple Heart County and the city of Williamsport as a Purple Heart City. He was also instrumental in establishing Veterans Court, which assists veterans charged with nonviolent crimes who are struggling with addiction, mental illness, or co-occurring disorders, and who come in contact with the criminal justice system. He is a charter member of the Vietnam War Post 51, President, Secretary, and Treasurer of Lycoming County Veterans Council from 1994 to 2003, Selective Services member, Veterans Treatment Court Mentor Coordinator, VFW Post 3528 Life member, Counterparts Association, Lycoming County Hometown Heroes, and serves as Master of Ceremonies for many, many veterans programs. Mr. McKnight, it's our pleasure to honor your service this afternoon. Thank you. Sometimes our recipients know the quilters, and in this case, this is Mike's sister, Kathy. The U.S. Army Reserve provides part-time trained soldiers to support active duty forces during crises, humanitarian aid missions, and overseas operations, serving as the nation's second line of defense. These units specialize in force provider equipment, which provides base camp sustainment, including climate-controlled housing, showers, latrines, and laundry services for soldiers who are in the field. As part of the Army Reserve, the 542nd soldiers provide both support for federal deployments as well as domestic emergency and disaster relief efforts. Mr. Figgles enlisted with the Army Reserves in May of 2000. At that time, if a reserve unit was deployed, most likely deployments were primarily supporting peacekeeping missions and humanitarian efforts. Most reservists spent 1 week in a month being a soldier and then went back to their own private lives. And then it happened. The September 11th, 2001 attacks. A coordinated series of Islamic terrorist suicide attacks perpetrated by Al-Qaeda against the United States. 19 terrorists hijacked 4 airliners and then flew one each into the Twin Towers at the World Trade Center. The third plane crashed into the Pentagon, the headquarters of the United States Department of Defense in Virginia. And the fourth plane crashed in rural Pennsylvania field during a passenger revolt. That evening, the Central Intelligence Agency informed President George W. Bush that its counterterrorism center had identified the attacks as having been the work of Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. The United States responded by launching the war on terror and invading Afghanistan. The attacks killed 2,977 people, injured thousands more, and gave rise to long-term health consequences, which, while costing at least $10 billion in infrastructure and property damage. It remains the deadliest terror attack in history, as well as the deadliest incident for firefighters and law enforcement personnel. The crashes of Flight 11 and Flight 175 were the deadliest aviation disasters of all time, and the collision of Flight 77 at the Pentagon resulted in the fourth highest number of ground fatalities in a plane crash in history. The destruction of the World Trade Centers and its environment seriously harmed the U.S. economy and induced global market shock. Many other countries strengthened anti-terrorism legislation and expanded their powers of law enforcement and intelligence agencies. The total number of deaths caused by all of these attacks worldwide, combined with the death tolls from these conflicts, has been estimated to be more than 4.5 million. More than 180,000 Americans decided to enlist after 9/11 for a sense of duty to serve their country after the attacks, and many thought they would be going after the monsters who did the attacks. Mr. Figgles was one of these Americans, changing his status from a reservist to active, serving with the 3rd Brigade, 101st Special Services. 1 in 5 veterans today served on active duty after those terrorist attacks. Their collective experiences, from deployment to combat to the transition back to civilian life, are markedly different from those who have served in previous wars. Roughly 3/4 of post-9/11 veterans were deployed at least once, compared with 58% of those who served before them. And post-9/11 veterans are about twice as likely as their counterparts to have served in a combat zone. Mr. Figgles was deployed twice, serving in Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Iraqi Freedom. Because they are more likely to have been deployed and to have seen combat, our post-9/11 veterans are also more likely to bear the scars of battle, whether physical or not. Assigned to the 3rd Brigade, 101st Special Services, Fort Campbell, Kentucky, a support platoon including fuelers, mechanics, medics, cooks, and security. Mr. Figgles' role during his deployments included water purification systems, fueling equipment, and in-country convoy security. Mr. Figgles, serving from 2000 to 2007, it is our pleasure to honor your service today.
What we'd like to do is have the other quilt receivers come up for a group picture, please, if you're able to.
I think he has it because he just got it.
Thank you for your service.
Here's I go back.
Yeah, just so deserving.
You're not going to say anything directly. You're not going to speak anymore.
We can go Thursday. I want to say congratulations to him.
Thank you all for honoring our veterans.
Hey, Dave. Dave,
The Muncy Historical Society started the process.
this is my granddaughter.
Oh, hi. I knew him when he was in diapers. No, that's not the left one.
He knows me since I was
Here we go.
Hold on, Mike. Hold on, Mike.
Since we started this process of awarding quilts in June of last year, the Muncy Historical Society, along with the vintage gatherers, have awarded over 55 quilts to the veterans from this area, so we continue that. Thank you all for coming out, and thank you for honoring our veterans.